Elijah Johnson lived in a small town called Maplewood. It wasn't the kind of place where big things happened, but it had its own charm. The streets were lined with trees and most people knew each other by name. But beneath the surface there was tension, especially between the police and some parts of the community. For Elijah, life was simple. He went to school, helped his mom around the house, and worked on his robotics projects whenever he could. At just 15 years old, Elijah was already known as the robot kid at school. His teachers often praised him for his creativity and problem-solving skills. He loved building machines that could do useful things like picking up trash or helping elderly neighbors carry groceries. His dream was to one day create something that would change the world. But right now, all he cared about was finishing his latest project, a small robot that could sort recycling. Elijah's mother, Lisa Johnson, worked hard to provide for her son. She was a nurse at the local hospital, working long hours to make sure they had enough to get by. Money was tight, but Lisa always made sure Elijah had what he needed. She encouraged him to follow his dreams and reminded him every day how proud she was of him. To Elijah, Lisa was his hero. She never complained even when life got tough, and she always found a way to keep smiling. One evening, after spending hours at the school's robotics club, Elijah walked home carrying a box filled with spare parts. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As he turned onto his street, he noticed a car parked across from their house. It was a police cruiser, its lights off, but unmistakable. Elijah slowed down, feeling uneasy. He didn't recognize the officer sitting inside, and it seemed strange for a cop to be parked there without any reason. When Elijah got home, he told his mom about the car. Lisa frowned but tried not to worry too much. "Maybe they're just patrolling," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of concern. Over the past few months, there had been rumors about increased police activity in their neighborhood. Some people claimed officers were targeting certain families unfairly, but Lisa didn't want to believe it. She trusted the system, or at least she wanted to. Later that night, Elijah sat at the kitchen table tinkering with his robot. The hum of the motor mixed with the soft sound of Lisa washing dishes. It was peaceful, almost normal. But outside, Officer Greg Miller sat in his cruiser watching the house. Miller was a tall man with sharp features and an intimidating presence. He had been a police officer for over 20 years, and while some respected him, others feared him. Rumors about his aggressive behavior toward minorities had circulated for years, but no one had ever been able to prove anything. Miller had received a tip earlier that week about suspicious activity at the Johnson residence. The informant hadn't provided many details, just vague claims about strange comings and goings. Normally, such information wouldn't have been enough to act on, but Miller wasn't interested in waiting. He had a reputation for taking matters into his own hands, especially when it came to cases involving young black individuals. In his mind, these were the kinds of people who needed to be watched closely. That night, Miller decided to take action. Around midnight, he radioed for backup and prepared to raid the house. He didn't bother knocking or announcing himself first. Instead, he kicked open the door, startling Lisa and Elijah awake. Flashlights blinded them as officers stormed inside, shouting orders. Lisa screamed, asking what was going on, but no one answered her. Instead, they pushed past her, tearing through drawers and dumping out boxes. Elijah stood frozen in shock, clutching his blanket. One of the officers grabbed him roughly by the arm and dragged him out of bed. "Where are the drugs?" the officer demanded, shaking him. Elijah stammered, trying to explain that he didn't know what they were talking about. But the words barely left his mouth before another officer shoved him against the wall. Meanwhile, Miller headed straight for Elijah's room. He rifled through shelves and closets until he found what he was looking for, a black duffel bag tucked away in a corner. Pulling it out triumphantly, he dumped its contents onto the floor. Inside were wires, batteries, and gears, nothing more than supplies for Elijah's robotics projects. But Miller didn't care. To him, this was proof. "Looks like we've got our guy," he sneered, holding up a piece of equipment as if it were damning evidence. Lisa pleaded with the officers, begging them to listen. "My son is innocent," she cried. "Those are just parts for his school projects." But Miller ignored her, barking commands to cuff Elijah and bring him downstairs. As they led him away, Elijah looked back at his mom, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't understand why this was happening. All he could think about was the unfinished robot sitting on the kitchen table and the promise he'd made to show it to his teacher the next day. The ride to the police station was silent, except for the sound of handcuffs clinking against metal bars. Elijah sat hunched over in the back seat, his mind racing. He replayed the events of the night over and over, searching for answers. Had he done something wrong? Was this some kind of mistake? But deep down, he knew it wasn't. This wasn't about him. It was about something bigger, something darker. As the car pulled into the station, Elijah felt a wave of fear wash over him. He had heard stories about what happened to kids like him once they entered the system. Would anyone believe him? Would anyone stand up for him? For the first time in his life, Elijah felt truly alone. Back at the house, Lisa collapsed onto the couch, overwhelmed by anger and despair. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do next. She thought about calling her cousin Kevin, a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases. Maybe he could help, but even as she reached for the phone, doubt crept in. What if no one listened? What if this was just the beginning? Outside, the quiet streets of Maplewood seemed unchanged, but inside the Johnson household, everything had shifted. The raid had shattered their sense of safety, leaving behind only questions and uncertainty. And as the hours ticked by, one thing became clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The police station was cold and unwelcoming. Elijah sat in a small gray room with no windows. The chair he was on felt hard and uncomfortable, and the fluorescent light above him buzzed faintly. His hands were still cuffed, and his heart raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He kept replaying the raid in his mind: the loud bangs on the door, the shouting officers, and the way his mom had begged them to stop. It felt like a nightmare, but he couldn't wake up. "Officer." Greg Miller walked into the room, holding the black duffel bag that had been taken from Elijah's closet. He dropped it onto the table with a thud, making Elijah flinch. "Let's get one thing straight," Miller said, leaning over the table. His voice was sharp and full of accusation. "We know what you've been up to. You think we're stupid? You think we don't see what's going on?" Elijah shook his head, tears welling up in his eyes. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "Those are just parts for my school projects. I build robots. Ask my teacher. She'll tell you." Miller laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Save it, kid. We've heard it all before. You think lying is going to help you now?" He pulled out a notebook and flipped through the pages. "We got reports about suspicious activity at your house. People saw you coming and going late at night. What were you doing, huh? Dealing drugs?" "I wasn't dealing anything," Elijah shouted, his voice cracking. "I was working on my robot. I stay up late sometimes because I'm trying to finish it, that's all." Miller didn't seem to care. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Listen, kid, if you confess now, things will go easier for you. But if you keep lying, it's only going to get worse. Trust me." Elijah felt trapped. He didn't know what to say or do. He wanted to explain everything, to show Miller the truth, but deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. This wasn't about evidence or facts. It was about something else entirely. Something darker. Back at the house, Lisa Johnson was frantic. After the officers left, she paced around the living room, trying to figure out her next move. Her phone lay on the coffee table, and she stared at it, debating whether to call her cousin Kevin. She trusted him, but she also worried about involving family in such a messy situation. Still, she knew she couldn't handle this alone. Finally, she picked up the phone and dialed Kevin's number. It rang twice before he answered, his voice groggy with sleep. "Lisa, do you have any idea what time it is?" he asked. "Kevin, I need your help," Lisa said quickly, her voice trembling. "They took Elijah. The police came to our house tonight and arrested him. They said he was involved in drug trafficking, but it's not true. He's innocent." Kevin sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. What? Slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. Lisa explained everything. The raid, the accusations, and how they had treated Elijah. By the time she finished, Kevin was furious. This sounds like racial profiling, he said firmly. Don't worry, Lisa. I'll be there, as soon as I can. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone without me present, okay? Not even the police. Lisa nodded, though Kevin couldn't see her. Thank you, she said softly. I don't know what I'd do without you. As Kevin got dressed and headed to the station, news of the raid began to spread through Maplewood. Neighbors who had heard the commotion earlier that night started talking. Some were sympathetic, whispering about how unfair it seemed. Others weren't so sure. Jake Thompson, a middle-aged man who lived 2 doors down, muttered to his wife, "You know, those kinds of kids always get into trouble sooner or later." At school the next morning, rumors flew among the students. Marcus, Elijah's best friend, arrived early and immediately noticed the tension. A group of boys stood near the lockers discussing what they'd heard. "Did you hear about Elijah?" one of them asked. "They say he got busted for selling drugs." Marcus spun around, his face red with anger. "That's not true." "He," snapped. "Elijah doesn't sell drugs, he builds robots. You guys don't know anything about him." The boys shrugged, unconvinced. "Well, why else would the cops arrest him?" one of them replied smugly. Marcus clenched his fists but didn't respond. Instead, he stormed off to find Rachel Hayes, another close friend of Elijah's. Rachel was already sitting in the cafeteria when Marcus found her. She looked pale and worried. "Have you talked to Elijah?" she asked anxiously. "No, they won't let us see him," Marcus said, slumping into a chair. "But I know he didn't do anything wrong. We have to do something." Rachel nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "There's a protest tomorrow outside the police station. Some of the parents are organizing it. Maybe we should join." Marcus hesitated. He wasn't used to standing up for himself, let alone leading a movement. But then he thought about Elijah, how kind and smart he was, how much he cared about building things to help people. If anyone deserved support, it was him. "Yeah," Marcus said finally. "Let's do it." Meanwhile, at the police station, Kevin arrived and demanded to see Elijah. When he walked into the interrogation room, Elijah looked up, relief washing over his face. "Kevin!" he cried. "Please, you have to believe me. I didn't do anything wrong." Kevin knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I believe you, Elijah. Don't worry, we're going to fix this." Then he turned to Miller, who was standing nearby. "My client isn't saying another word until I review the evidence against him, and unless you have solid proof, I suggest you release him immediately." Miller scowled but didn't argue. He stepped out of the room, muttering under his breath. Kevin turned back to Elijah, his expression serious. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "This isn't going to be easy. These guys aren't playing fair, but we're going to fight back. Together." Elijah nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since the raid. He didn't fully understand how the legal system worked, but he trusted Kevin. If anyone could help him, it was his mom's cousin. Later that afternoon, Lisa arrived at the station. She hugged Elijah tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she whispered. "But we're going to get through this, I promise." Kevin filled her in on the plan. "For now, we focus on getting Elijah out of here. After that, we dig deeper. Something doesn't add up, and I intend to find out what." As the day wore on, the mood in Maplewood grew tense. Flyers for the protest appeared on lampposts and bulletin boards, urging residents to stand up against injustice. Some people supported the cause, while others remained skeptical. Old prejudices simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. That evening, Lisa tucked Elijah into bed, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Tomorrow's a new day," she said softly. "And no matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Elijah managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Mom," he murmured. "I just want this to be over." So did Lisa. But as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, she knew the fight was far from finished. The raid had exposed cracks in their community, cracks that ran deep. Healing them wouldn't be easy, but giving up wasn't an option. This completes part 2 of the story, written in third-person style with simple and basic English. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with the next part or make any adjustments. The next morning, Maplewood buzzed with activity. News of Elijah's arrest had spread quickly, and people were talking about it everywhere, on the streets, in coffee shops, and even at the grocery store. Some believed Elijah was innocent, while others weren't so sure. The divide in the community was clear, but one thing everyone agreed on was that something big was happening. Kevin spent most of the morning reviewing the case. He requested copies of all the evidence the police had against Elijah, including the black duffel bag and any reports or witness statements. When he finally received the documents, he flipped through them carefully, searching for inconsistencies. What he found, or rather what he didn't find, was troubling. There was no proof linking Elijah to drug trafficking. No fingerprints, no drugs, nothing. Just a vague tip from an anonymous source claiming there was suspicious activity at the house. This is weak, Kevin muttered to himself as he sat at his desk. They're trying to build a case out of thin air. He knew this wasn't just about Elijah. It was about a pattern of behavior within the police department. Officer Greg Miller's name kept coming up in stories of similar incidents involving young black individuals. Kevin decided to dig deeper into Miller's record, hoping to uncover something useful. Meanwhile, Lisa tried to keep things normal at home. She made breakfast for herself and Elijah, though neither of them had much of an appetite. Elijah sat at the table, staring blankly at his plate. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the raid over and over. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone had set him up. But who? And why? "Mom," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Do you think someone planted that bag in my room?" Lisa paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. It was a question she'd been asking herself since the night of the raid. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted. "But it's possible. We need to figure out who would want to hurt us like this." Elijah nodded slowly. He remembered seeing a strange car parked outside their house a few days earlier. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, but now it seemed suspicious. "There was a car," he told his mom. "It was parked across the street for a while. I didn't recognize it." Lisa's eyes widened. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. "I didn't think it was important," Elijah replied. "But maybe it is." Lisa grabbed her phone and called Kevin. She explained what Elijah had said, and Kevin immediately suggested checking the security camera they had installed outside the house months ago. If someone was snooping around, we might have caught it on tape, he said. Later that afternoon, Kevin arrived at the house with a laptop. Together, they reviewed the footage from the past week. It didn't take long to find something unusual. On the night before the raid, a man wearing a hoodie and dark jeans had crept into their backyard. He glanced around nervously before slipping something into the bushes near Elijah's window. Then he hurried away, disappearing into the shadows. "That's him," Elijah said, pointing at the screen. "That's the guy who planted the bag." Kevin froze the image and zoomed in, studying the man's face. Though the picture wasn't perfect, it was clear enough to identify him. "We need to find out who this is," Kevin said firmly. "If we can prove someone planted evidence, we'll have a strong case against the police." Word of the protest spread rapidly throughout Maplewood. Flyers appeared on every corner, urging residents to stand up for justice. Marcus and Rachel worked tirelessly to rally support among their classmates. They handed out flyers during lunch and talked to teachers after school. Slowly but surely, people began to take notice. On the day of the protest, dozens of people gathered outside the police station. Some held signs that read "Justice for Elijah" and "Stop Racial Profiling." Others chanted slogans like "No More Lies" and "Free Elijah Johnson." The crowd included students, parents, and even a few local activists. Lisa stood near the front holding a megaphone. Her voice trembled as she addressed the group. "My son is innocent," she said, her words echoing through the street. He's a good kid who loves building robots and helping people. He doesn't deserve this. None of our children deserve this." The crowd erupted in cheers, showing their support. Marcus and Rachel stood beside Lisa, feeling proud to be part of something bigger than themselves. For the first time, Elijah felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe the community really did care. Inside the police station, Officer Greg Miller watched the protest unfold on a security monitor. His jaw tightened as he listened to the chants and saw the sea of angry faces. He turned to his partner, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "They don't understand how dangerous these kids are." His partner raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? Seems like a lot of people are standing up for him." Miller dismissed the comment with a wave of his hand. "They're just being manipulated by emotions. Mark my words, this will blow over soon." Back at the protest, Kevin took the stage to address the crowd. He spoke passionately about systemic racism and the importance of holding law enforcement accountable. "This isn't just about Elijah," he said. "It's about every child who has been unfairly targeted because of the color of their skin. We can't let fear and prejudice dictate our lives. We have to fight back." The crowd cheered again, energized by his words. After the speeches ended, Marcus and Rachel led a march through the streets of Maplewood. They walked together, side by side, carrying signs and chanting slogans. Cars honked in solidarity as they passed by, and some drivers even joined the march. As the day went on, the protest gained momentum. Local news stations covered the event, broadcasting interviews with Lisa, Kevin, and several protesters. One reporter asked Lisa how she felt about the accusations against her son. She looked straight into the camera and said, "Elijah is a loving, creative boy who wouldn't hurt anyone. The real criminals are the ones planting evidence and tearing families apart." Her words struck a chord with viewers, sparking conversations online and offline. Social media lit up with hashtags like "Justice for Elijah" and "Our End Racial Profiling." People from neighboring towns reached out to offer support, sending messages of encouragement and vowing to attend future protests. By evening, the crowd began to disperse, but the energy remained. Marcus and Rachel promised to keep organizing, determined to keep the momentum going. Lisa thanked everyone for their support, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel hopeful. That night, as Lisa tucked Elijah into bed, she kissed his forehead and smiled. "See?" she said softly. "People care. We're not alone in this." Elijah nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered. "For everything." Despite the progress, Kevin knew there was still work to do. He spent hours researching Officer Miller's background, uncovering disturbing patterns of misconduct. Several former cases involved young black individuals who had been falsely accused of crimes based on flimsy evidence. In one instance, a teenager had spent months in juvenile detention before being cleared of all charges. Armed with this information, Kevin drafted a formal complaint against Miller and submitted it to the police department's Internal Affairs Division. He also reached out to contacts in the media, sharing his findings and urging them to investigate further. Slowly but surely, the pieces were falling into place. As the days passed, the pressure on the police department grew. Calls for accountability echoed throughout Maplewood, forcing officials to take notice. While the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Elijah's story had sparked a movement that refused to be silenced. The days following the protest were tense in Maplewood. The community was divided, with some people standing firmly behind Elijah and others defending the police. Conversations at the grocery store, the park, and even church revolved around the case. Some residents whispered about how Officer Greg Miller had always been too tough, while others dismissed the protests as overreactions. Despite the mixed reactions, one thing was certain: the story wasn't going away anytime soon. Kevin worked tirelessly to gather evidence that could exonerate Elijah. He spent hours reviewing old cases involving Miller, looking for patterns or mistakes that might help build their defense. What he found was alarming. In nearly every case, the accusations against young black individuals had fallen apart under scrutiny. Yet Miller's record remained clean. No formal complaints, No disciplinary actions. It seemed like someone higher up was protecting him. Determined to dig deeper, Kevin reached out to a private investigator named Diane Carter. She was known for her sharp instincts and ability to uncover hidden truths. When Kevin explained the situation, Diane agreed to take on the case. "If there's dirt on this guy, I'll find it," she said confidently. Meanwhile, Lisa tried to keep life as normal as possible for Elijah. School had resumed, but things weren't easy. Some students avoided him, whispering behind his back, while others went out of their way to show support. Marcus and Rachel stayed by his side, walking with him between classes and sitting with him at lunch. They didn't let anyone say a bad word about him without speaking up. One afternoon after school, Marcus approached Elijah with an idea. "What if we talk to the neighbors?" he suggested. "Maybe someone saw something weird before the raid. We can't just sit around waiting for answers." Elijah hesitated. He wasn't sure if it would help, but he didn't have any better ideas. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's try." The two boys started knocking on doors, asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual in the weeks leading up to the raid. Most people shook their heads or claimed they hadn't seen anything. But when they reached Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, she paused thoughtfully. "I did see someone lurking around your backyard a few nights ago," she admitted. "It was late, so I didn't think much of it at the time. But now that you mention it, it does seem strange." "Did you recognize him?" Marcus asked eagerly. Mrs. Peterson frowned. "Not really. He was wearing dark clothes and kept his head down. But I remember thinking he looked familiar. Maybe I've seen him around town before." Elijah thanked her and promised to pass along the information to Kevin. It wasn't much, but it was another piece of the puzzle. At the same time, Rachel decided to do some investigating of her own. She worked part-time at a convenience store near the school, and she often saw customers from all over Maplewood. One evening, while restocking shelves, she noticed a man lingering by the entrance. He seemed nervous, glancing around as if he were waiting for someone. Something about him caught Rachel's attention. He looked vaguely familiar. She watched him carefully, pretending to focus on her work. After a few minutes, the man left, but not before dropping a crumpled receipt. Rachel picked it up and smoothed it out. The name on the receipt read, Jake Harris. She didn't recognize the name, but she knew it might be important. Tucking the receipt into her pocket, she finished her shift and went straight to Kevin's office. When she showed him the receipt, Kevin's eyes lit up. "This is great," he said. "Jake Harris has ties to a local drug ring. If we can connect him to the planted evidence, we might have our smoking gun." Kevin wasted no time. He ran a background check on Jake Harris and discovered that he had a history of petty crimes, including theft and vandalism. More importantly, he had been questioned in connection with several drug-related incidents, but never charged. Kevin suspected that Harris was working for someone higher up, someone who wanted to shift attention away from their operation. With this new lead, Kevin called Diane to share the information. "I need you to track down Jake Harris," he said. "Find out what he knows and make sure he talks." Diane got to work immediately. Using her network of contacts, she located Harris within hours. He was staying at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. When Diane arrived, she found him sitting outside smoking a cigarette. He looked rough. His clothes were dirty and his face was unshaven. But Diane didn't care about appearances. She wanted answers. "Jake Harris?" she asked, approaching him casually. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Harris squinted at her suspiciously. "Who are you?" he demanded. "I'm just trying to help someone," Diane replied smoothly. "A kid named Elijah Johnson. Ring any bells?" Harris stiffened, his cigarette falling from his fingers. "I don't know anything about that," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Diane leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Listen, Jake. You're already in deep with these guys. If you cooperate, maybe we can cut you a deal. But if you keep lying, things are only going to get worse." For a moment, Harris said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "But not here. Let's go somewhere private." They drove to a nearby diner, where Harris spilled everything. He admitted that he had been paid to plant the bag in Elijah's room. The money came from a man named Carl Dawson, a known drug dealer with connections to a larger criminal organization. Dawson had heard rumors that the police were closing in on his operation and needed a distraction. Framing Elijah was supposed to buy them time. Diane recorded the entire conversation, making sure to capture every detail. When she returned to Kevin, she handed over the recording with a satisfied smile. "This should do it," she said. "Now we just need to figure out what to do next." Kevin listened to the recording carefully, his mind racing. With this evidence, they could expose not only Officer Miller, but also the drug ring behind the setup. But they had to act quickly. If Dawson found out Harris had talked, there was no telling what he might do. That night, Kevin met with Lisa and Elijah to explain the situation. "We've got proof that someone planted the evidence," he said. "But it's not just Miller. We're dealing with a bigger problem. A drug ring used you as a scapegoat to protect themselves." Elijah's eyes widened. "So, it wasn't just about me?" "No," Kevin replied gently. "You were a pawn in their game, but now we have a chance to stop them. For good." Lisa hugged Elijah tightly, tears streaming down her face. "We're going to fight back," she whispered. "Together." The next morning, Kevin filed a formal complaint with the district attorney, attaching the recording and all the evidence they had gathered. He also sent copies to local news outlets, knowing that public pressure would force officials to act. Within hours, the story exploded. Reporters swarmed the police station, demanding answers. Calls poured in from concerned citizens, urging accountability. Officer Miller, meanwhile, remained defiant. During a televised press conference, he denied any wrongdoing and accused Kevin of fabricating lies to smear his reputation. "These accusations are baseless," he declared. "I've served this community for over 20 years, and I won't let a bunch of criminals drag my name through the mud." But the tide was turning. As more details emerged, public opinion began to shift. Even some of Miller's former supporters started questioning his integrity. The mayor issued a statement calling for an independent investigation, promising transparency and justice. For Elijah, the weight of the past few weeks finally began to lift. He still had a long road ahead, but for the first time, he felt like they were winning. Marcus and Rachel continued organizing protests, keeping the momentum alive. Together, they were proving that change was possible, even in a place like Maplewood. The investigation into Officer Greg Miller and the drug ring began to pick up speed. The district attorney, under pressure from the public and media, launched a formal inquiry. Kevin handed over all the evidence they had gathered: the recording of Jake Harris's confession, the security footage of the man planting the bag, and the records of Miller's past misconduct. It was clear that this case was bigger than just Elijah. It exposed deep-rooted corruption in Maplewood. Jake Harris, now scared for his safety, agreed to cooperate fully with the authorities. He revealed more details about Carl Dawson, the man who had orchestrated the setup. According to Harris, Dawson ran a small but powerful drug operation that operated out of abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town. Dawson had ties to larger criminal networks and often bribed local officials to look the other way. When rumors spread that the police were closing in, Dawson panicked and decided to create a diversion by framing an innocent person. Someone, no one would suspect, that someone turned out to be Elijah Johnson. Kevin shared this information with Lisa and Elijah during a meeting at their home. "This isn't just about clearing your name anymore," Kevin said. "It's about bringing down a dangerous organization. If we play our cards right, we can stop them from hurting anyone else." Elijah nodded, though he still felt overwhelmed. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said softly. "I just want it to be over." Lisa put a comforting hand on her son's shoulder. "We'll get through this," she assured him. "And when it's done, we'll make sure no one else goes through what we did." As the investigation unfolded, tensions in Maplewood reached a boiling point. Supporters of Elijah held another protest outside the police station, demanding justice not only for him, but for everyone affected by systemic racism and corruption. Marcus and Rachel organized chants and speeches, keeping the energy high. This time the crowd was even larger, with people coming from neighboring towns to show solidarity. But not everyone supported the movement. Some residents believed Miller's claims that the accusations against him were baseless. A few even argued that Elijah must have done something wrong, or he wouldn't have been targeted. These voices grew louder as the days passed, creating a rift in the community. Arguments broke out at school, in stores, and online, turning friends into opponents. At one particularly heated town hall meeting, emotions ran high. Lisa stood up to speak, her voice steady despite the hostile stares from some audience members. "My son is innocent," she said firmly. "He was chosen because of the color of his skin and because he was easy to blame. We need to stop letting fear and prejudice divide us. This isn't about politics. It's about doing what's right." Her words resonated with many, but others remained unconvinced. One man stood up, pointing angrily at Lisa. "You're making this about race," he shouted. "Why can't you admit your kid might actually be guilty?" Before Lisa could respond, Marcus stepped forward. His face was red with anger, but his voice stayed calm. "Elijah builds robots," he said, "not drugs. If you spent 5 minutes talking to him, you'd know that. But instead you choose to believe lies because it's easier than facing the truth." The room fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Rachel added, "We're fighting for justice. Not just for Elijah, but for everyone who's been treated unfairly. Are you really okay with staying silent while innocent people suffer?" Some attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others clapped in agreement. Though the division remained, it was clear that the movement was gaining ground. Meanwhile, Officer Miller found himself increasingly isolated. His colleagues avoided him, fearing association with the scandal. Even those who had once defended him began to distance themselves as new evidence emerged. During an internal review hearing, Miller tried to justify his actions, claiming he had followed proper protocol. But the video footage of the raid and the lack of concrete evidence against Elijah painted a damning picture. "You framed a child," one investigator said bluntly. "How do you expect us to trust anything you say?" Miller clenched his fists, his face turning red. "I was doing my job," he snapped. "If you let criminals walk free because of political correctness, then you're failing this community." His words only fueled the growing outrage. By the end of the hearing, Miller was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. It was a small victory, but it gave hope to those fighting for change. Back at the convenience store, Rachel kept her eyes peeled for any sign of Carl Dawson. She knew he frequented the area, often stopping by late at night to buy supplies. Sure enough, one evening, she spotted him walking toward the counter. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. As he paid for his items, she struck up a casual conversation. "Hey, do you live around here?" she asked, pretending to browse a rack of snacks. Dawson glanced at her suspiciously. "What's it to you?" he replied gruffly. "I've seen you around," Rachel said with a shrug. "I'm just curious." Dawson muttered something under his breath and hurried out of the store. Once he was gone, Rachel quickly called Kevin. "I saw him," she said excitedly. "Carl Dawson. He comes here a lot. If we stake out the place, maybe we can catch him." Kevin agreed and arranged for Diane to monitor the store. Discreet news agencies reported on the developments, putting additional pressure on law enforcement to act decisively. The mayor issued a statement promising transparency and accountability, vowing to root out corruption within the department. For Elijah, the mounting attention was both overwhelming and empowering. He attended a rally alongside his mother, Marcus, and Rachel, where he addressed the crowd for the first time. Standing behind a microphone, his hands trembling slightly, he spoke from the heart. "I never thought something like this could happen, to me," he admitted. "But I'm standing here today because I know I'm not alone. Together we can make things better. For me, for my family, and for everyone who deserves fairness." The crowd erupted in applause, cheering for the boy who had become a symbol of resilience. For the first time since the raid, Elijah felt a sense of purpose. He realized that his story wasn't just about him, it was about inspiring others to stand up for what was right. As the week drew to a close, arrests began. Jake Harris testified against Carl Dawson, leading to a raid on Dawson's hideout. Officers confiscated drugs, weapons, and cash, dismantling the operation entirely. Dawson was taken into custody, along with several accomplices. News of the takedown spread quickly, reigniting hope in the community. Though challenges remained, the tide had turned. Elijah's case had uncovered layers of corruption and injustice, sparking conversations that couldn't be ignored. People started talking about reform, not just in law enforcement, but in schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Slowly but surely, Maplewood began to heal. The arrests of Carl Dawson and his accomplices marked a turning point in Maplewood. The drug ring that had operated quietly for years was finally dismantled, thanks to the bravery of Elijah, Lisa, Kevin, and their supporters. News outlets across the state covered the story, highlighting how one young boy's fight for justice had exposed corruption and brought about real change. But while the immediate threat was gone, the scars left behind ran deep. Elijah returned to school, but things were different now. Some students treated him with newfound respect, impressed by the way he had stood up to injustice. Others still whispered behind his back, unsure what to believe. Marcus and Rachel stayed close, shielding him from negativity whenever they could. They reminded him daily that he wasn't alone, that he had people who believed in him. One afternoon, after robotics club, Elijah sat at the kitchen table working on his robot. It was nearly finished, its tiny gears whirring as it moved across the surface. Lisa watched him from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. "You've come so far," she said softly. Elijah looked up and smiled. "It feels good to be doing this again," he admitted. "For a while I thought I'd never finish it." Lisa walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got so much to offer the world," she told him. "Don't let anyone make you forget that." Kevin kept busy wrapping up the legal case against Officer Greg Miller. With overwhelming evidence, including Jake Harris's testimony, the security footage, and records of past misconduct, the district attorney decided to press charges. Miller faced multiple counts of abuse of power, racial profiling, and obstruction of justice. Though he denied everything, even his staunchest supporters began to turn away as the truth came to light. At the trial, Elijah took the stand to share his side of the story. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, it grew stronger. He described the night of the raid, the fear he felt, and the frustration of being accused of something he didn't do. When he finished, the courtroom erupted in applause. Even the judge nodded approvingly, acknowledging Elijah's courage. In the end, Miller was found guilty and sentenced to prison. The verdict sent shockwaves through Maplewood. For many, it was a sign that accountability was possible, even in a system riddled with flaws. Local officials vowed to implement reforms, including better training for officers and stricter oversight, to prevent similar incidents in the future. As the dust settled, Elijah reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that while the ordeal had been painful, it had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, community, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Inspired by these experiences, he decided to use his skills to help others. He modified his robot to serve a new purpose, monitoring public spaces ethically and providing communities with tools to protect themselves. When the robot was finally complete, Elijah held a small demonstration in the park. Friends, neighbors, and even some local leaders attended, eager to see what he had created. The robot zipped around, scanning the area and alerting users to potential hazards like broken glass or suspicious activity. Everyone was amazed, not just by the technology, but by the idea behind it. "This is incredible," Marcus said, grinning. "You're going to change the world, man." Elijah shrugged modestly. "I just want to help people feel safe," he replied. "If my robot can do that, then I've done my job." Lisa hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Your dad would be too." The community continued to heal slowly. Conversations about systemic racism and police reform became more common, both in private homes and public forums. Schools introduced programs to teach students about fairness and equality, while local businesses pledged to support minority-owned ventures. Though progress was slow, it was steady. Marcus and Rachel remained committed to activism, organizing workshops and events to keep the momentum going. They encouraged others to speak out when they saw injustice, reminding them that change started with individuals willing to take a stand. Together, they formed a youth group dedicated to promoting unity and understanding in Maplewood. For Elijah, life began to return to normal, or at least a new kind of normal. He threw himself into his studies, determined to excel in school. His teacher praised his dedication, calling him a role model for his classmates. At home, he spent hours tinkering with inventions, dreaming of ways to make life better for others. One evening, as the sun set over Maplewood, Elijah stood in the backyard with his mom. The air was cool, and the sky glowed orange and pink. "Do you think things will ever really change?" he asked, staring at the horizon. Lisa thought for a moment before answering. "Change takes time," she said, "but every step forward matters. What you've done, it's a big step, and there will be more to come." Elijah nodded, feeling a sense of hope he hadn't felt in months. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. With his family, friends, and community by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Later that night, as Elijah lay in bed, he thought about all the people who had supported him, from Kevin and Diane to Marcus and Rachel. He thought about the protesters who had marched for him, the neighbors who had spoken up, and the strangers who had sent messages of encouragement. Most of all, he thought about his mom, whose strength and love had carried him through the darkest days. "Thank you," he whispered into the quiet room, though no one was there to hear him. "Thank you for believing in me." As sleep overtook him, Elijah dreamed of robots roaming the streets of Maplewood, keeping watch and ensuring safety for everyone. In his dream, the town was peaceful, united, and free from fear. It was a vision of hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, change was possible. And as morning broke, casting golden light over Maplewood, Elijah woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but he knew he had already made a difference. One step at a time, he and those around him were building a brighter future.